Howdy, folks, and welcome back to Get NIST-y, the series that breaks compliance out of the checkbox trap and turns it into a real security advantage. No fluff, no FUD, just practical strategies to make compliance work for your MSP. I'm Jared Kasner, and I'm joined by my co-founder of Blacksmith InfoSec and co-host of Get NIST-y, Michael Zabarski.
Hey, everyone.
So, felt like we spent a lot of the last 2 weeks talking about SOC 2. Today, our questions are going to be more focused on CMMC and CMMC Level 2 specifically. So, I guess without further ado, we'll dive right in to our first question. If you're a small company with maybe 10 to 15 people and only a few of them ever touch CUI, that's controlled unclassified information, what does a realistic CMMC Level 2 path actually look like without lighting money on fire? Mike, you want me to go first, or you want to go first?
Well, I was going to start by saying that I'm going to refer to it as CUI for the whole podcast episode.
Call it CUI if you want to. Sounds a little gooey to me, but if you want to call it CUI, go for it.
No, go ahead. You can kick us off if you want.
Yeah, so the short version is if only a small portion of your company is focused or is touching CUI or FCI, which is federal contract information, or any of the regulated data types within CMMC, you can and should be scoping down your CMMC scope to just the people and devices that are touching CUI. And that way you can actually limit the scope and limit the damage and the pain and the cost, all of this that goes into that. And we've seen this already. Some of our MSP partners, we've got one in particular that has, they service primarily construction businesses in the DC area. Guess what? A lot of construction businesses in the DC area also are doing, if not contract work, but at least subcontract work for Department of Defense and Director of National Intelligence and other areas that require CMMC. And that's just to build, right? Forget about the people that are actually doing work inside those secure facilities. Even the building of those facilities creates the opportunity for CUI, FCI, other sensitive data types. And so what they've done is they've hived off portions of their business to be CMMC compliant. And that way they can just do the 4 or 5 people that are actually touching stuff as opposed to the entire construction business and not needing to worry about all the devices and the people and the construction workers that are out not working on DoD space can live in the non-DoD, non-CMMC world, and the folks that are doing the DoD work can be a little bit more tightly controlled. So, Mike, you look like you want to jump in.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's 2 pieces. It's scoping and then realizing that you can leverage enclave solutions that will totally encompass that whole workflow that needs to be CMMC compliant and save money there, right? Because you don't need to move the whole tenant to GCC High. You don't need to, and you can inherit the controls of environments, right? So if you're using the GCC High tenant, then all that stuff is taken care of for you and you need to build it from scratch. You need to make sure that the support personnel are either not touching your CUI or that would be your MSP, or they need to be certified, right? The CMMC cares about who has access to CUI, and so you're going to need to figure out, what does this look like? Is my MSP going to be conducting backups of this data? If they are, guess what? You need to work with a MSP that's going to actually be certified because they'll have access to that data. And then just making sure you're hardening. One of the big things that I've seen is people jump the gun. They will go out and before they've even scoped it or figured out what they're trying to secure, they go out and they get consultants involved, or they start writing policies. Like, the first thing you need to do is figure out, hey, where's this data going to live? What's the scope of it? And a lot of that might be dictated by whoever that contracting agency is, right? Whether it's directly DHS or if you're a subcontractor, it will be your parent contractor. Sometimes you can avoid it altogether. You can by saying, hey, we're going to work within your systems, right? And that way you don't need to deal with it, because when you're working with CUI in your parent contractor systems, that's all you do. So they'll provide you with a VDI or something in their enclave. You'll remote in, you'll do the work you need to do, and then you hop back out, and you don't even really need to worry about stuff nearly as much. So all of it goes back to scoping and figuring out how can you be compliant with this and achieve it with least amount of pain.
Yeah. So all of that is really good advice. The next thing you can do is, again, if you're going to hive off a portion of your business, set up the rest of your business to make it a little bit easier to transition people into that enclave business later on. And so the great thing about CMMC is that it's very, very tightly coupled with NIST 800-171, especially Rev 2, which is built on top of NIST cybersecurity framework. And so if you have your CMMC enclave that is a little bit more tightly controlled, but then align the rest of your business to NIST cybersecurity framework or NIST CSF, you're going to actually make it a lot easier as people need to transition in and out of that CMMC enclave within your business to streamline that process, because they'll already be doing a lot of the right things, and a lot of those controls will be in place. You won't be in GCC High, but you will be in a lot of the other controls will be there and ready to go. So it's the transition process becomes a lot smoother. So that's, I guess, the next step or next piece of advice that I would give you is actually having that bifurcated security program. So one portion of your business is not just on, it's not just one portion of your business that's doing CMMC and the rest of everybody else is cowboys in the Wild West. It's one's on CMMC and one's on NIST CSF or something that ladders up to that.
Yeah, and it's actually a really good call out, because the other piece of this is if you ever need to shift someone into that alcove, all of a sudden you don't want to all of a sudden turn their whole work process on its head, right? You don't want to say all of a sudden you have to do all these extra controls that you've never had to do before. It's nice to say, hey, you've already been doing 90% of this, and guess what? Now you need to do a little bit more, versus, hey, you've been doing your job this way and you can no longer do your job this way, period. And now you need to do a full shift of everything. So that's a great call out to avoid that change fatigue for your end clients or end users.
Yep. Now, CMMC Level 1 does not require an auditor. That's a self-attestation, but CMMC Level 2 does. So any tips or tricks that you have, Mike, or thoughts around how to choose the right C3PAO? What does C3PAO even stand for? Like how does somebody get into that space and make sure that they are ready for an audit and that they keep their audit costs low? Because again, it's not enough to just do the work. You actually have to prove that you've done it as well. So what do you want to...
So the first one is figure out when you need to be certified by. Look at your contract.
Let's start with what is a C3PAO first of all. Let's define the. This one's not a TLA, but it's an acronym. Let's define what that
so C3PAO is Certified Third Party Assessor Organization. So it's organizations that are licensed to actually conduct the audits. And there's a number of them out there. They're all very busy right now. So if you need to do something either in 2026 or even early 2027, I would start engaging with C3PAOs now to get on their schedule, because there's a line.
Should you just take the first C3PAO you talk to?
Absolutely, every time. With any other auditor.
Yeah. So obviously there's going to be some price variability between C3PAOs, but what are some of the things that you look for or that you would look for as you're choosing a C3PAO for an organization beyond just price, obviously, right? Because I know some people are going to be more price sensitive than others, but how do you think about interviewing C3PAOs?
Yeah. So for me, it's a lot talking to them, figuring out who's actually going to be working on it. I know last week when we talked about SOC auditors, we talked about, or auditors in general, we talked about there's different types of auditors. Some are newer, some are older, some are more sticklier. I'm going to use that as a word. And so figuring out who's going to work best for you, right? Just like with anyone else, you're going to have different auditors with different personalities. The outcomes should be the same. These organizations have gone through very long processes to be C3PAOs. And so the outcome, again, should be the same, but the personalities of the auditors will always be different. So make sure you pick an organization that fits your personality. There is also I will say, RPOs, which are organizations that can help prepare you for CMC audits. And the RPO cannot be the C3PAO because you can't have them prepare you and then audit you and then say, cool, everything's good. Want some separation of duties there. But if you feel like you're out of your depth and you need help, there are organizations out there, they're specifically ready to help you with that piece, and they're registered to help you with that piece.
Yeah, and there are plenty of VCISOs also that focus on the MSP channel. I'm thinking of folks like Jesse Miller and a handful of others that really understand deeply the CMMC world and can help out. And so feel free to call a friend, to bring in somebody outside of your organization to help you, especially the first 1 or 2 times you go through this process, because it can be fairly daunting. Which actually is sort of a nice segue into our second question of the day. And so we may tie up some loose ends on question 1, but let's go ahead and dive into question 2 here. Mike, do you want to ask that one for us?
Yeah. Is achieving CMMC level 2 actually as hard as people make it sound, or is the real problem that companies refuse to scope it tightly and operationalize it properly? And the answer is yes.
I'm going to give my favorite answer to these kinds of questions. The answer is yes. And so the short version is yes, it can be as hard as people make it sound, and yes, people or companies are refusing to scope it tightly and operationalize it properly. And the two things are not mutually exclusive, but there are ways of making it easier. And so again, that the first piece really is, and we're going to hammer on this one because it's really critical, is scope it properly. Understand how much of your business actually needs to be in scope for this, and scope everything else out of it. And more importantly, don't just scope those things out. If they make sure that when they are scoped out, they are actually completely hived off. So you have something that is what's in scope is completely segregated from the rest of your business. And that may mean you need to have a separate Microsoft tenant for it. And in fact, probably does. Right. So, but get that full logical and physical separation where it's needed to be able to hive off that portion of your business and really scope things down tightly. And that will make you, it's going to save you a ton of time and energy by doing so. So now, Mike, let's talk about do you want to talk about operationalization next, or do you want to talk about it? Is it really as hard as people make it sound?
Yeah. Let's talk about, is it hard first? The short answer is it can be, right? Part of it depends on where you're starting from. This is one of the conversations that Jared and I always have with partners and people in general, is the best thing you can do with compliance is start. Work towards something, anything. It doesn't matter what. All of it cross maps. None of it will go to waste for the most part. So start down the journey of compliance, whether you use NIST CSF or something else. And that way, when something like CMC comes out, you can already be 50, 60% there. A lot of the controls within CMMC are organizational controls, right? So figuring out, hey, we need to have policies in place. Hey, we need to make sure that we do A, B, C, D, E as a business process. There's a bunch that you can inherit from your service providers. Again, if you move to GCC High, you don't need to rebuild your on-prem data center, right? So you can inherit all those controls from them. And then there's going to be stuff that you're going to have to do, like with anything else. You're going to need to make sure that stuff is actually using like FIPS 140-2 or -3 now encryption. And that's kind of across the board. And so that becomes a pain. The good news is there's a register where you can see what stuff is already validated. So that's helpful. really making sure that you are using the tooling that supports CUI processing and storage, etc. Right, and this is where people really get into a pickle sometimes, where they try to connect tools that are not supposed to process CUI to their like GCC tenant, or to things that are that contain CUI, and then they run into issues. Right, you're in GCC High, you have all your CUI in there, and you select a backup solution that's not CMC compliant, that doesn't use FIPS 140 encryption, etc. And all of a sudden, your CUIs and scope is creeped, and you have CUIs in a place that it shouldn't be in, right? So a lot of it is really trying to going back to the first question. A lot of it is scoping, right? Making sure that you know where your data is. That's the biggest piece of this, right? Is mapping out those data flows and figuring out, hey, this is how we're going to receive our data from the government. This is how we're going to work on it. This is how we're going to get it back to them. I use the term government loosely, government, parent contractor, whatever, right?
Yep.
And once you've mapped that out, then secure that process. Make sure that everything within that process is CMC compliant, and that part is not as heavy of a lift as people make it out to be. There's going to be organizational change. You're going to have to replace some tooling. You're going to have to change some business processes, but it is not a hey, let's go after the ogre with pitchforks and torches.
Yep.
I think I covered that. Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I think with CMMC is I mean, how many controls is it in CMMC level 2, Mike? Off the top
So
of your head?
110 controls at the top level, and then there's like sub controls, the ABCDEs of the world. But yeah, 110 primary controls.
Yeah, and so I think that's where most people find it very daunting. And the message that I tell a lot of folks is, if you treat it like eating an elephant, where you have and try to swallow that whole thing in one bite, you're going to be absolutely miserable. So break it up, like set a phased, build a project plan around it, just like you would with anything else, and take it one bite at a time, and that will make your life a lot easier. Um, we've talked about this before. Start small. If you think you might end up going down the CMMC road someday in the future, start aligning your business to NIST CSF today, because again, that's going to start putting those things into place. We talk about this a little bit like a 401k. If you start to make those investments early in your business, the value of those investments is going to compound over time. And so your total cost of ownership for compliance is going to go way down. If you wait until you sign a contract or want to sign a contract that says, I'll be CMMC level 2 compliant by X date, now all of a sudden, you're number one, giving yourself a compressed window, and then number two, having to go figure all of that out from scratch, essentially at that point. And you may already be doing a lot of the right things, but if you're not tracking it and understanding just what that gap is, now you're starting from a gap analysis the day you want to sign that contract, as opposed to already understanding where you are and what progress you're making. And this is really the value of the tools that exist in the space that already have all those cross mappings built in. You don't have to use one of those to be CMMC compliant. You don't have to use one of those to be like, there is no requirement to use a tool. However, if you can do it all in spreadsheets and SharePoint to map all that. But you are going to make your life a lot easier if you find a tool that has all the cross mappings built into it. So as you align as NIST CSF or whatever other framework, you can then also track your progress towards any other framework that's out there and see just where you stand. So when the contract comes up or when that opportunity comes up, you have a much easier chance to say, oh yeah, we actually can meet that contractual obligation that you're asking us for. Here's how, like, we know how much work is left, and it makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah, the other big gotcha here, and I've seen this a couple times, is people implement the controls and they um, then do nothing with them because they haven't operationalized them. And so they buy the technology, they'll put stuff in, but they don't actually build a business process around, hey, we need to maintain this, and we need to conduct our user audits, and we need to do A, B, C, D, E, right? Um, that's a big chunk of the audit, is making sure that you're consistently doing all this stuff, because If you're not, then you aren't doing any of it.
Yep.
Right. And, I've even seen things like, it's not something that I personally saw. It was a story that I heard from one of my friends that had to deal with this. But an organization was going through an audit, and one of their policies basically said, "Hey, we do this daily," which was check backups, verify they all passed, and then if anything failed, kick them off again. And the auditor came in, was talking to the person, said, "Hey, show me how you check your backups." And the guy pulled out his SOP and started looking through how to do that. And the auditor's like, "Cool, you clearly do not do this every day, because if you're having to check your SOP for something that's done daily, it's not being done daily." And like, it was a finding on the spot. And so again, if you're gonna say you're doing something every day, make sure you're doing it every day. Make sure you actually operationalize it and don't just ignore it.
Yep. Yeah. Compliance. A lot of people treat compliance as a finish line. Compliance is not a finish line. It's not a race. It's not there's not a destination. Compliance is a lifestyle. Compliance is a thing that once you make the commitment to do it, you are committing to do it. Not today, not tomorrow, but every day going forward, right? And so that's something that you do need to keep in mind as you're thinking about whether or not you want to sign that contract in the first place. Make sure that you are understanding that this is not just a one-time sprint to get to CMMC compliance. This is an ongoing lifestyle change for your business, that at least the portion that you've put in scope for CMMC is going to need to stay in scope for CMMC and continue to do that like continue to practice that behavior well beyond the audit, because you're going to need to go through the next year's audit and the years that, right? It's a process, it's a journey, and it's like I said, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it is it's a sprint to get to maintenance, right? You're gonna rush so you can continue doing it.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Well, I think we've answered our questions for today. So, as always, if you have any follow up, please don't hesitate to reach back out. We love follow up questions and taking things as we go. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's content, please share this episode with a friend. And if you joined us for the first time, hitting that follow button really helps others discover us in the future and means you won't miss an episode. As always, you can submit your own questions at blacksmithinfosec.com/ask. And with that, we'll see you next week. Get NIST-y.